The first shot cracked through the dawn silence as Grace Sullivan buried her husband. She didn't flinch, just tightened her grip on the small wooden cross marked Thomas Sullivan, beloved husband, as another gunshot echoed in the distance. Tombstone, Arizona Territory, 1883, was no place for showing weakness, especially not for a woman standing alone at the edge of Boot Hill. Grace had worn the same black dress for 3 months now, ever since Thomas had taken a bullet during a bank robbery gone wrong. He hadn't even been involved, just a bystander caught in the crossfire while depositing their meager savings. Their dreams of a small ranch with horses and cattle scattered like dust in the desert wind that now whipped at her veil. Mrs. Sullivan. Sheriff Parker approached, hat in hand. My condolences again. It's not safe to linger out here. Those shots came from the direction of the Lucky Strike saloon. Likely just cowboys letting off steam, but still. Grace nodded, her face a mask of composure. At 26, she was now alone in a town that devoured the vulnerable. Thank you, Sheriff. I'll be on my way. As she walked back to town, the black fabric of her dress absorbed the heat of the rising sun. The boarding house she now called home loomed ahead, a stark reminder that she'd have to find work soon. Thomas's position as a clerk at the general store had provided enough for them both, but Mr. Harrison had already hired a replacement. Inside her small room, Grace placed Thomas's pocket watch on the nightstand, its gold surface catching the light that filtered through the thin curtains. Her fingers lingered on the metal, still faintly warm from being clutched in her palm. 3 months felt like both an eternity and merely seconds. A knock on her door startled her from her reverie. Mrs. Sullivan? The landlady, Mrs. Winters, stood in the doorway. I hate to disturb you today of all days, but I've had an inquiry. The new schoolteacher hasn't arrived, and the town council's looking for someone temporary. I mentioned you have some education. Grace blinked. She had taught briefly back in Boston before marrying Thomas and following his dreams west. It would provide room and board at the schoolhouse, Mrs. Winters added gently. And some income. Grace nodded, not trusting her voice. Teaching children wasn't what she had planned, but plans seemed a luxury of the past now. I'll let Mayor Thompson know you'll meet with him tomorrow, Mrs. Winters said, patting Grace's hand. And dear, I know it doesn't feel like it now, but life does go on. Thomas would want that for you. As the door closed, Grace turned to the small mirror hanging on the wall. Her reflection stared back, pale skin, dark circles beneath hazel eyes, and black fabric from neck to toe. She looked like a shadow, which felt appropriate. That's all she was now, a shadow of the woman who had arrived in Tombstone with hope and love. 2 days later, Grace stood before 26 children ranging from 6 to 15 years of age in Tombstone's one-room schoolhouse. Her black dress was impeccably clean, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, and her voice steady as she introduced herself. Good morning. I am Mrs. Sullivan, your teacher until Miss Henderson arrives from the east. Please open your readers to page 12. Teaching provided structure to her days, a reason to rise each morning and focus on something beyond her grief. The schoolhouse, with its attached living quarters, became her sanctuary. Days stretched into weeks, and weeks into months. The black dresses she had managed to afford 2 more became her armor against the world. The children eventually stopped whispering about her. The townsfolk grew accustomed to her solitary figure walking from the schoolhouse to church on Sundays, to the general store for supplies, and occasionally to the cemetery on quiet evenings. Some called her the Black Widow, when they thought she couldn't hear, not with malice but with the casual cruelty of those uncomfortable with grief. 1 year after Thomas's death, Mayor Thompson approached her after Sunday service. Mrs. Sullivan, we've received word that Miss Henderson has taken a position elsewhere. The town council would like to offer you the permanent teaching position, if you're amenable. Grace accepted with quiet gratitude. That evening, she stood before Thomas's grave, the desert wind tugging at her skirts. I have work, Thomas, she whispered. Not what we planned, but honest work. As she turned to leave, she noticed a rider in the distance, silhouetted against the setting sun. He tipped his hat when he saw her looking, then rode on toward town. Just another drifter, she thought, turning her attention back to the path. The years continued their slow march. Grace taught, lived quietly, and observed the town's growth from her position of respectful solitude. Children grew, graduated, and new ones took their places. Some parents invited her to dinners or social gatherings, but she declined politely. Her black dresses, now 4 in rotation, remained her constant companions, until the spring of 1888, when Isaac O'Malley rode into Tombstone. Grace first noticed him at church, a tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a clear winter sky. He sat in the back pew, his hat resting on his knee, his posture betraying a slight discomfort with the indoor setting. A cowboy, by the look of him, though cleaner than most who passed through. After the service, she overheard the banker, Mr. Phillips, introducing him around. "Folks, this is Isaac O'Malley. He's purchased the old Davidson place outside town. Planning to raise horses, he tells me." Grace slipped away before the introductions reached her. New residents were nothing unusual in a growing town like Tombstone, and she had lesson plans to prepare. 3 days later, Isaac O'Malley appeared at her classroom door just as the children were leaving for the day. His tall frame filled the doorway, hat in hand, boots recently cleaned but still bearing the marks of hard work. "Mrs. Sullivan?" His voice carried a slight lilt, suggesting Irish heritage a generation or two back. "I hope I'm not intruding." Grace straightened the papers on her desk. "School hours are over, Mr. O'Malley, but if you have a child to enroll—" "No, madam, no children." He stepped into the room, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm here about the library committee Mrs. Phillips mentioned. Said you're in charge of ordering books for the school and town." Grace nodded. The library committee was essentially just her and the Reverend's wife, selecting books with their limited budget. "I've brought some books from back east." He gestured toward a wagon visible through the window. "Thought the school might make use of them. Classics mostly, some history. Been hauling them around too long." Grace approached the window. Indeed, there was a large wooden crate in his wagon. "That's very generous, Mr. O'Malley. The children would certainly benefit. Let me bring them in for you." Without waiting for a response, he strode out and returned moments later carrying the heavy crate with apparent ease. He set it down near her desk. "Where would you like these?" "The shelves along the back wall, please." Grace watched as he carried the crate across the room. His movements were efficient, economical, suggesting a man accustomed to physical labor. As he began removing books and handing them to her, Dickens, Twain, Shakespeare, and several volumes on American history and natural sciences, Grace found herself curious despite her usual reserve. "You're well read for a cowboy?" His eyes crinkled at the corners. "My mother was a schoolteacher back in Missouri. Wouldn't let me near a horse until I could recite Shakespeare." Grace found herself almost smiling as she arranged the books. "She sounds formidable." That she was. A shadow crossed his face. "Past 5 years back. Influenza. I'm sorry for your loss," Grace said, the words automatic but sincere. He nodded, studying her black dress for a moment before returning to the task. When the crate was empty, he stepped back. "Well, I won't keep you from your evening, Mrs. Sullivan. Thank you for the books, Mr. O'Malley. The children will be delighted." He settled his hat back on his head. "If you need any repairs around the schoolhouse, I'm handy with tools. That roof looks like it could use some attention before the summer rains." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and departed, leaving Grace with an unexpected collection of books and an equally unexpected sense of having been seen not as the town's perpetual widow, but as the schoolteacher who might need a solid roof. That Sunday, Grace noticed Isaac sitting in the same back pew. After the service, as she was leaving, he fell into step beside her. "Mrs. Sullivan, I was wondering if I might walk you home. There's something I'd like to discuss." Curious eyes turned their way. In 5 years, Grace had rarely been seen in conversation with a man, let alone walking alongside one. "Very well, Mr. O'Malley, though it's not far." She maintained a proper distance as they walked, aware of the gazes following them. "I've been speaking with some of the ranchers," he began. "They've mentioned their children often miss school during busy seasons. I was thinking of offering riding lessons on Saturdays for the town children. Thought you might have insight on who might benefit most." Grace considered this. "Many of our students have never ridden, despite living in cattle country. Some families can't afford horses. That's what I figured. I've got some gentle mares suitable for beginners. Thought I might start with the older children, teach them proper care and riding. No charge." "That's generous," Grace said, surprised. "Why?" They reached the schoolhouse, stopping at the small gate. Isaac looked toward the distant mountains. Been on my own a long time, Mrs. Sullivan. Figured it's time I put down roots, be part of something. Children need skills, especially out here. I have some to share. His honesty was refreshing. Grace nodded. I'll speak with the parents. Those who are interested can contact you directly. Much obliged. He tipped his hat. Good day, Mrs. Sullivan. As he walked away, Grace found herself watching him longer than was strictly proper. There was something solid about Isaac O'Malley, something genuine that Tombstone, with its mix of opportunists and dreamers, sometimes lacked. The following Saturday, Grace found herself walking toward the edge of town where Isaac had set up a small corral for the riding lessons. She told herself she was merely checking on her students' welfare, but curiosity pulled her forward just as strongly. 8 children had arrived for the first lesson, including the Wilkins twins, who lived on a small farm but had never learned to ride properly. Isaac was showing them how to approach a dappled mare, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. That's it, slow and steady. Let her see you. No, you mean no harm. Horses are like people, they remember who treats them well and who doesn't. Grace remained at a distance, watching as he patiently guided each child through the basics of grooming and saddling. His manner was different with the children, gentler than she would have expected from a man who had likely driven cattle across dangerous territories. When he helped 10-year-old Sally Mitchell onto a small pinto, his hands steady and respectful as he adjusted her posture, Grace felt a tug of something she hadn't experienced in years, appreciation for a man's kindness. He spotted her then, raising a hand in greeting. Caught watching, Grace nodded in acknowledgement before turning to leave. But he called out, Mrs. Sullivan, could use your help if you've got a moment. Reluctantly, she approached the corral. I'm not familiar with horses, Mr. O'Malley. No need to be. Sally here is a bit nervous. Thought having her teacher nearby might help her confidence. Sally looked down from her perch on the horse, eyes wide with both excitement and trepidation. Please, Mrs. Sullivan? Grace relented, entering the corral and standing near the pinto's head while Isaac led the horse in a slow circle, instructing Sally on how to sit and hold the reins. The morning sun was warm, and Grace found herself removing her black shawl as she walked alongside. See, you're a natural, Isaac told Sally after a few rounds. Mrs. Sullivan, would you like to try? Belle here is the gentlest horse you'll ever meet. Oh no, I couldn't possibly. Come on, Mrs. Sullivan, several children chimed in. It's fun. Before she could formulate another refusal, Isaac was standing beside her, offering his hand. Just once around the corral. Everyone should know how to ride out here. Perhaps it was the children's expectant faces, or perhaps it was something in Isaac's steady gaze that made refusal seem churlish. Either way, Grace found herself placing her gloved hand in his calloused palm and allowing him to help her mount after Sally dismounted. Keep your back straight but not stiff, Isaac instructed, adjusting the stirrups. Hold the reins like this, not too tight, not too loose. Belle knows what to do. As the horse began to move under his guidance, Grace felt a momentary panic, then a strange exhilaration. She hadn't done anything new, anything that wasn't teaching or maintaining her quiet existence in years. There you go, Isaac said, his voice warm with approval. You're a natural, Mrs. Sullivan. When the brief ride ended and he helped her down, his hands at her waist were respectful and quickly withdrawn, but Grace felt the imprint of them as she walked back to the schoolhouse. It had been so long since anyone had touched her, even in such an innocent context. That night, as she prepared for bed, Grace caught herself smiling at the memory of the children's delight when she had ridden around the corral. She quickly sobered, glancing at Thomas's watch on her nightstand. Happiness felt like a betrayal still, 5 years later. The riding lessons became a Saturday fixture in Tombstone. Grace often found reasons to pass by, sometimes stopping to watch, occasionally accepting Isaac's invitation to join them. He never pressed her to participate, but always made space for her if she chose to. As spring turned to summer, Grace noticed changes in the schoolhouse, a repaired roof that no longer leaked during the infrequent but intense desert rainstorms, a new shelf built precisely to fit her growing book collection, a stubborn window that suddenly opened smoothly. Isaac never mentioned these repairs, but she knew they were his work. One scorching July afternoon, as Grace was cleaning the schoolroom after the children had departed, A commotion outside drew her attention. A wagon had overturned near the general store, and a crowd was gathering. Grace hurried out, concerned one of her students might be involved. Instead, she found Isaac and several men attempting to lift the wagon off a trapped man, Mr. Peterson, who delivered goods between Tombstone and Tucson. "On three," Isaac called. "1, 2, 3. The men heaved, raising the wagon just enough for two others to pull Peterson free. He was conscious but clearly injured, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. Without thinking, Grace rushed forward. "Bring him to the schoolhouse," she directed. "It's closer than the doctor's office, and I have clean water." They carried Peterson into the schoolroom, clearing a space on her desk. Grace quickly organized the children's water bucket, clean rags, and her own small supply of medicinal alcohol. "Someone fetch Dr. Matthews," she instructed, then turned to the injured man. "Mr. Peterson, try to lie still. We'll get you comfortable until the doctor arrives." Isaac was already removing Peterson's boot with careful movements. "Broken, for sure," he muttered. "Grace, Mrs. Sullivan, could you tear some strips for splinting?" She didn't comment on his use of her given name, focusing instead on tearing an old sheet into bandages. They worked in tandem, Isaac holding the leg steady while she wrapped it, their movements complementing each other as if they had done this many times before. When Dr. Matthews arrived 20 minutes later, he raised an eyebrow at the neat splint. "Well done, both of you. This will make setting it much easier." As Peterson was carried to the doctor's office, Grace became suddenly aware of the state of her classroom and herself. Blood stained her black dress and hands. The desk would need scrubbing, and Isaac O'Malley was watching her with undisguised admiration. "You've got steady hands in a crisis," he said, washing his own hands in the remaining clean water. "Not everyone does." Grace shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Growing up with 4 brothers, I've seen my share of injuries." Isaac smiled. "Still, you knew exactly what to do." He glanced around. "Let me help you clean up." Together they restored order to the classroom, working in companionable silence. As they finished, Isaac cleared his throat. "Mrs. Sullivan, Grace, I was wondering if you might join me for supper at the hotel restaurant this evening. As a thank you for your help today." Grace froze in the act of arranging books. No man had asked to dine with her since Thomas's death. The idea was both alarming and oddly tempting. "I don't think that would be appropriate, Mr. O'Malley." His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes dimmed slightly. "Of course. Forgive my presumption." He picked up his hat. "Good evening, Mrs. Sullivan." After he left, Grace sat at her desk, emotions churning. Dining with a man, especially one who had begun to feature in her thoughts more than was proper, felt like stepping into a world she had deliberately left behind. Yet his invitation had awakened something she had thought long buried. 2 weeks later, a package arrived at the schoolhouse. Inside, Grace found a book, The Language of Flowers by Kate Greenaway, with a simple note. "Thought this might interest your students. Isaac O'Malley." Grace traced the embossed cover, touched by the thoughtful gift. The next day after school, she made the unprecedented decision to visit Isaac's ranch. The Davidson place had been run down when Isaac purchased it, but as Grace approached, she noted the repaired fences, fresh paint on the small house, and the new stable. Several horses grazed in a pasture, and the sound of hammering led her around to the back of the house. Isaac was constructing what appeared to be a chicken coop, shirt sleeves rolled up, his concentration absolute. Grace cleared her throat. He turned, surprise evident on his face. "Mrs. Sullivan, this is unexpected. I wanted to thank you for the book," she said, suddenly unsure of her decision to come. "It's a lovely addition to our library." He set down his hammer, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You're welcome. Would you like some tea? Or I could saddle Belle if you'd like another writing lesson." "Tea would be nice," she said, the normality of the offer somehow settling her nerves. Inside, Isaac's home was modest but tidy, with bookshelves lining one wall and simple, well-made furniture. He moved with efficiency in the small kitchen, setting water to boil on the stove. "It's not much," he said, gesturing around, "but it'll do until I can build something better." "It's lovely," Grace said truthfully. "You've done remarkable work here in such a short time." He smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "Always believed in building something that lasts." As they drank tea, Isaac told her about his plans for the ranch, breeding quality horses, expanding gradually, perhaps adding cattle eventually. His ambitions were practical, his approach methodical. "What about you?" he asked. "Will you always teach in Tombstone?" The question caught Grace off guard. She had stopped thinking about her future in any terms other than continuing as she was. "I suppose so. I haven't considered alternatives." Isaac studied her for a moment. Life has a way of presenting alternatives when we least expect them. When Grace left an hour later, she carried with her the strange feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Their conversation had been proper, largely impersonal, yet underlying it was a current of possibility she hadn't felt in years. As summer turned to fall, Grace found herself accepting Isaac's invitations with increasing frequency to help with a harvest festival for the schoolchildren at his ranch, to advise him on books for his growing library, to review his plans for expanding the riding lessons to include adults. Each encounter was proper, often in the company of others, yet Grace was keenly aware of the subtle shift in their relationship. The town noticed too. Mrs. Phillips commented after church one Sunday, "That O'Malley is quite taken with you, Grace. He's a good man, solid. Not like some who pass through here." Grace demurred, but the observation lingered. Was Isaac taken with her? And more unsettlingly, was she with him? The question haunted her as she stood before her wardrobe one evening in October, staring at the row of black dresses. 5 years of mourning, of defining herself solely as Thomas's widow. She touched the fabric of her newest black dress, purchased just 2 months ago. "What am I doing?" she whispered to the empty room. The next day, a letter arrived from Boston, her younger sister announcing her second child's birth, along with news of family and old acquaintances. Grace sat on the schoolhouse steps reading it as the sunset painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "Bad news." Isaac's voice startled her. He stood a few feet away, holding the reins of his horse. "No good news. My sister has a daughter." Grace folded the letter. "I was just thinking how life continues, with or without our participation." Isaac nodded, his expression thoughtful. "True enough." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you walk with me a bit? There's something I'd like to show you." "Curious," Grace agreed. They walked toward the edge of town, the desert stretching before them, the setting sun casting long shadows. "I purchased more land last week," Isaac said, pointing to the west. "All the way to that ridge line. Good grazing land, water rights included." "Congratulations," Grace said. "Your dream is taking shape." "Part of it." Isaac stopped, turning to face her. "Grace, I've been thinking about what you said about life continuing. 5 years ago, I lost everything in a fire, my small ranch in Colorado, nearly all I owned. Started over with just my horse and the clothes on my back." Grace hadn't known this. "I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me something important." His eyes, remarkably blue in the fading light, held hers. "Loss doesn't define us unless we let it. I could have given up, blamed fate, turned bitter. Instead, I decided to build something new, something better." The parallel to her own situation was unmistakable. Grace looked away, toward the distant mountains. "It's not the same, isn't it?" Isaac's voice was gentle. "Grace, you've been wearing black for 5 years. Teaching other people's children, watching life from the sidelines. When does it end?" The question struck her like a physical blow. "I loved my husband," she said defensively. "I don't doubt that for a moment. But he's gone, and you're here, barely living." Isaac stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "Darlin, it's time to live in color again." The endearment, spoken so naturally, combined with the truth of his words, brought unexpected tears to Grace's eyes. She turned away, not wanting him to see her vulnerability. "I should return home," she said stiffly. "It's getting late." Isaac didn't try to stop her. "Think about what I said, Grace. Life's too precious to spend it all in mourning." That night, Grace couldn't sleep. Isaac's words echoed in her mind, along with memories of Thomas not as she usually remembered him, pale and still in his coffin, but laughing, vibrant, telling her about his dreams for their future. "What would you want from me now, Thomas?" she whispered to the darkness. The answer came not as a voice, but as a certainty. Thomas, who had loved life so fiercely, would not have wanted her to stop living when he did. The realization brought both pain and release. Grace wept then, truly mourned not just Thomas but the years she had spent shrouded in grief, holding the world at arm's length. When morning came, Grace opened the trunk she had kept locked beneath her bed. Inside lay the clothes she had packed when they left, Boston dresses in soft blues and greens, a shawl embroidered with flowers that had been her mother's, ribbons for her hair. The fabrics had yellowed slightly with age, but they were intact, tokens of a life before grief had consumed her. Her hands trembled as she lifted out a blue dress, simple but far removed from the severe black she had worn for so long. Wearing it felt like an act of betrayal, of forgetting, and yet also like breathing after being underwater. When she walked into the schoolroom that morning, the children fell silent, staring at her transformed appearance. Then little Emma Phillips said, "You look pretty, Mrs. Sullivan." And the moment passed, the day continuing with its usual rhythm. After school, Grace made her way to the cemetery. Thomas's grave was well tended. She had never neglected that duty. She stood before the weathered cross, her blue dress stirring in the autumn breeze. "I'm not forgetting you," she said softly. "I'm just remembering how to live. I think you'd understand that." As she turned to leave, she saw Isaac standing at a respectful distance, his horse tethered to a nearby tree. He didn't approach until she walked toward him. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said. "I come here sometimes myself, to visit friends." Grace nodded, understanding. In a place like Tombstone, everyone had lost someone. "You weren't intruding." Isaac's gaze took in her blue dress, appreciation evident in his eyes. "You look lovely, Grace." "Thank you." She gestured toward the path leading back to town. "Would you walk with me?" They walked side by side, not touching but close enough that their shadows merged in the late afternoon light. Grace found herself telling Isaac about Thomas, not just his death, but his life, his humor, his dreams. Isaac listened without interruption, offering only occasional nods of understanding. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment before sharing his own story, the fire that had claimed his Colorado ranch, started by lightning and fueled by drought-dried grass. How he had managed to save only his favorite horse and a box of books that had belonged to his mother. "We're both builders, I think," he said as they reached the schoolhouse. "Taking what remains and creating something new." The insight resonated with Grace. "Yes, I suppose we are." Isaac hesitated, then said, "The town's holding a harvest dance next Saturday. Would you consider attending? With me?" A public statement of sorts, not just Grace wearing color again, but being seen with Isaac in a social context that suggested more than friendship. She took a deep breath. "Yes, I would like that." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the desert. "I'll call for you at 7, then." The week passed in a blur of anticipation and trepidation. Grace altered her blue dress, refreshing the lace at the collar and cuffs. She unpacked more clothes from the trunk, hanging them in her wardrobe alongside the black dresses she wasn't yet ready to discard completely. The night of the dance, Grace found herself studying her reflection with critical eyes. The woman looking back at her was both familiar and strange, her hair arranged more softly than in years, her dress bringing out the green in her hazel eyes. Isaac arrived precisely at 7, dressed in his best clothes, his usually unruly hair tamed. He stared at her for a moment before finding his voice. "You are a sight to behold, Grace Sullivan." She blushed and used to compliments after so long. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. O'Malley." The town hall had been decorated with autumn leaves, pumpkins, and lanterns. As they entered, conversations paused, heads turned. Grace felt the weight of curious stares but found, to her surprise, that she didn't mind. Isaac's steady presence beside her gave her confidence. Mrs. Phillips approached immediately, her approval evident. "Grace, you look wonderful." "And Mr. O'Malley, how nice to see you joining our celebration." Others followed, offering greetings, comments on the decorations, observations about the fine weather they'd been having. The awkward moment passed, and the evening continued with music, dancing, and the easy sociability of a small town. When Isaac led Grace to the dance floor for a waltz, his hand resting lightly at her waist, she felt a flutter of nervousness. "I'm out of practice," she admitted. "Just follow my lead," he said, and then they were moving together in perfect harmony, as if they had danced 100 times before. Later, as they walked back to the schoolhouse under a canopy of stars, Isaac said, "Thank you for coming tonight. I know it wasn't easy, stepping back into the world this way. Grace considered this. Actually, it was easier than I expected. Like remembering how to ride a bicycle. Have you ever ridden a bicycle? Isaac asked, amusement in his voice. No. Grace laughed, the sound surprising her. But I imagine it's something your body remembers, even when your mind has forgotten. At her door, Isaac took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. Good night, Grace. May I call on you tomorrow? Perhaps we could ride out to see the new foal that was born last week. I'd like that, she said, and meant it. The following weeks brought a gradual transformation. Grace added more colors to her wardrobe, a green dress for teaching, a russet shawl for cooler evenings, ribbons in her hair on Sundays. She accepted invitations to tea, joined the actual library committee when it formed, and rode out to Isaac's ranch on Saturday afternoons after the children's riding lessons. As Christmas approached, the schoolhouse bustled with preparations for the annual pageant. Grace was pinning paper stars to the wall when Isaac arrived, carrying a small fir tree. Thought your classroom could use some holiday cheer, he said, setting it in the corner. The children, staying late to practice their parts, swarmed around him, exclaiming over the tree and bombarding him with questions about decorations. Isaac answered patiently, helping them set up the tree in a bucket of sand he had brought for that purpose. Grace watched the scene with a full heart. Isaac had become a favorite with her students, often stopping by to help with projects or share stories of his travels. His presence in the classroom felt natural now, as did his growing presence in her life. After the children left, Isaac helped Grace clean up the scattered paper and glue from their star-making project. I have something to ask you, he said, his usual confidence seemingly diminished. Grace looked up from the desk she was wiping. Yes. Christmas dinner. At my place. He ran a hand through his hair. I'm not much of a cook, mind you, but Mrs. Phillips has offered to help with the turkey. Thought we might invite some of the folks who don't have family nearby, Reverend Cooper, old Mr. Jenkins from the livery, perhaps Dr. Matthews. The invitation wasn't what Grace had expected, but it touched her deeply. That's a wonderful idea, Isaac. I'd be happy to help with the preparations. He smiled, relief evident. Good. That's good. As he turned to leave, Grace was struck by a sudden certainty that there had been more he wanted to say. But the moment passed, and she returned to her preparations, thoughts of Christmas dinner a warm promise in the December chill. The holiday gathering was a success, with 10 people crowded around the table Isaac had built specially for the occasion. The ranch house was decorated with pine boughs, red ribbons, and candles, creating an atmosphere of warmth and welcome. Grace found herself watching Isaac throughout the evening, the easy way he made their guests feel at home, his thoughtful attention to details like Mr. Jenkins's difficulty cutting his food with arthritic hands, the genuine pleasure he took in the company. Something had shifted in her heart, a recognition she wasn't yet ready to name but couldn't deny. After the guests departed, Isaac insisted Grace remain while he hitched his wagon to drive her home. It's too cold and dark for walking, he said, building up the fire for her comfort while he went to prepare the horse. Alone in his home, Grace wandered to the bookshelves, running her fingers along the spines of volumes now familiar to her. Over the past months, they had spent many evenings discussing books they both loved, sometimes reading passages aloud to each other. A small wooden box on the highest shelf caught her attention. It wasn't something she had noticed before. Standing on tiptoe, she lifted it down, curious. The box contained letters, tied with a faded ribbon, and a daguerreotype of a woman with Isaac's eyes and determined chin. His mother, Grace presumed. Beneath these lay a small velvet pouch. Before she could wonder what it contained, Isaac returned. Wagon's ready, he announced, then stopped when he saw what she was holding. Found my treasure box, I see. Grace hastily replaced it on the shelf. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have pried. No need for apologies. Isaac approached, taking the box back down. Been meaning to show you something in here anyway. He opened the velvet pouch and tipped a ring into his palm, a simple gold band set with a single pearl. My grandmother's. My mother wore it until she died. She gave it to me before she passed, said I should give it to a woman with both strength and softness. Grace's heart began to race as Isaac looked up at her, his expression vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. I've been trying to find the right moment, the right words, he said quietly. Truth is, I've known since that day at the cemetery when you wore blue again that you were the one I wanted to build a life with. But I didn't want to rush you." Grace struggled to find her voice. "Isaac, you don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "I know this is sudden, though it doesn't feel sudden to me. I've loved you for months, Grace. Take time to think, if you need it." Love. The word hung in the air between them, both frightening and exhilarating. Grace looked at the ring, then at Isaac's face, earnest, hopeful, and somehow already dear to her in ways she hadn't fully acknowledged. "Ask me," she whispered. Isaac's expression cleared, hope replacing uncertainty. He took her hand, the ring held carefully between them. "Grace Sullivan, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of building a life, a family, a future with me?" The answer came more easily than Grace would have imagined possible a year ago, or even 6 months ago. "Yes, Isaac. Yes, I will." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been made for her, the pearl gleaming in the firelight. When he kissed her, gently at first, and then with growing certainty as she responded, Grace felt the last shadows of her long grief recede, replaced by the promise of a love both new and enduring. They were married in April 1889, when the desert bloomed briefly with wildflowers. Grace wore a dress of pale gold, with wildflowers in her hair, and Thomas's watch tucked into a small pocket sewn into the lining not as a reminder of grief, but as an acknowledgement that love, once given, remained part of her always. The schoolchildren formed an honor guard at the church door, tossing flower petals and cheering as the newlyweds emerged. The entire town, it seemed, had turned out to celebrate. Even Sheriff Parker, now gray-haired and considering retirement, offered gruff congratulations. Their honeymoon was a 2-week journey to San Francisco, where they walked along the bay, attended the theater, and began their life together away from the watchful eyes of Tombstone. When they returned, Grace moved into the ranch house, which Isaac had expanded during the winter months in anticipation of her approval. "Room for a family," he had said when showing her the additional bedroom. "If that's what you want." It was what she wanted. Grace discovered not just the teaching that had sustained her through grief, but the chance to raise children of her own, to create the family she and Thomas had once planned, now with Isaac. The transition wasn't without challenges. Grace continued teaching while helping to run the ranch, learning about horses and cattle, adapting to the rhythms of rural life. Isaac, accustomed to solitude, had to adjust to sharing decisions, space, and time. Yet they weathered these adjustments with the same steady approach they brought to all aspects of their life together, with patience, humor, and the deep understanding that came from having both experienced profound loss and found their way back to joy. In March 1890, Grace confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks: she was expecting their first child. Isaac's reaction was everything she could have hoped for, a mixture of joy, awe, and tender concern for her well-being. "A baby," he said, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "The first, I hope," Grace replied, covering his hand with her own. "I've always wanted a large family." Isaac laughed, the sound rich with happiness. "As many as you want, Darlin. This house can grow along with us." As her pregnancy progressed, Grace reluctantly resigned from teaching, promising the school board she would return once the baby was older. Her replacement, a young woman from California named Miss Harrington, moved into the schoolhouse quarters Grace had occupied for so long. "Strange to think of someone else living there," Grace remarked as Isaac drove her past the schoolhouse one afternoon in her 7th month. "It was my sanctuary for so long." "Sanctuaries can become cages if we're not careful," Isaac said thoughtfully. "You made the choice to step out, to live fully again. That's the real blessing." Grace squeezed his hand, grateful for his insight. "When did you get so wise, Cowboy?" "About the time I fell in love with a widow in a blue dress," he replied with a wink. Their son, Robert Thomas O'Malley, was born on a cold November night, with Dr. Matthews and Mrs. Phillips in attendance. Isaac paced outside until the baby's first cry rang out, then entered the bedroom with tears in his eyes. "He's perfect," Isaac whispered, looking down at the small bundle in Grace's arms. "Just like his mother." Grace traced the baby's tiny features: Isaac's nose, perhaps her chin, a unique blend of them both. "He's himself," she said softly. "His own person, with his own path to walk someday. Isaac sat beside her on the bed, his arm encircling her shoulders. But we'll walk alongside him as long as he needs us. As Robert grew, so did the ranch and their family. A daughter, Elizabeth, joined them in 1892, followed by twins Michael and Margaret in 1894. The house expanded accordingly, with Isaac adding rooms as needed and Grace creating a warm, lively home filled with books, music, and laughter. Grace eventually returned to teaching, but only part-time, focusing on the older children while a new full-time teacher handled the younger grades. She found joy in balancing her roles as teacher, mother, wife, and rancher's partner, each aspect enriching the others. Isaac's business flourished as well. His eye for quality horses earned him a reputation that spread beyond Arizona territory. The O'Malley Ranch became known for its fine stock, and Isaac was increasingly called upon to judge competitions and advise other breeders. Through it all, their partnership remained the foundation of their success. They made decisions together, weathered setbacks as a team, and celebrated achievements side by side. The love that had begun so tentatively, shadowed by their respective pasts, grew into something neither had imagined possible, a bond strengthened by shared purpose and mutual respect. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac surprised Grace with a gift, a painting he had commissioned from an artist in Tucson, depicting Grace in the blue dress she had worn to the harvest dance, standing beside Belle, the horse she had first ridden under Isaac's guidance. "To remind us both," Isaac said as she unwrapped it, "of the moment you began to live in color again." Grace touched the canvas, moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift and the memories it evoked. "I was so afraid then," she admitted. "Afraid of betraying Thomas, afraid of being hurt again, afraid of the town's judgment. And yet you found the courage to step forward anyway." Isaac drew her into his arms. "That's why I fell in love with you, Grace O'Malley. Your courage and your heart." She smiled at the name still new enough to give her a small thrill after a decade of marriage. "And I fell in love with your patience. Your willingness to wait while I found my way back to life." "I would have waited forever," Isaac said simply. As they stood together before the painting, their 4 children's laughter drifting from the yard where they played under the watchful eye of Mrs. Phillips, now their part-time nanny, Grace reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The young widow in black who had stood alone at a grave, walling herself off from life, seemed like someone from a story, now a character she had once played but no longer recognized. The grief that had defined her for so long had transformed into something else, a quiet gratitude for having loved deeply, twice in one lifetime. "What are you thinking?" Isaac asked, his arm warm around her waist. Grace leaned into him, secure in the life they had built together. "That sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another, and that I'm grateful, every day, that you had the wisdom to see color where I could only see black." "And I'm grateful," Isaac replied, "that you had the courage to reach for that color, to paint our life together in all the shades of joy and challenge and love." Outside, the Arizona sunset painted the desert in vivid hues of orange, pink, and purple, a daily reminder that even after darkness, color always returned to the world. For Grace and Isaac O'Malley, surrounded by the family they had created together, that truth was the foundation of their shared happiness and would remain so for all the colorful years to come.